A queen opened her dead husband's coffin and kissed his cold feet. Then she did it again and again. For months, she dragged his body across Spain, refusing to let anyone bury him. People called her mad. Her own father used that word to lock her away for nearly 50 years. But here's the strange part. The thing that made her famous was not her real curse. The real damage came from a choice nobody noticed, and it would surface 200 years later inside the body of a child king. The curse nobody noticed. Her name was Joanna of Castile. In 1496, at 16, she married a duke everyone called Philip the Handsome. She loved him fast and hard. He cheated on her constantly. She once cut off a mistress's hair in a rage. That wedding also made Philip the First Habsburg King of Castile. Hold on to that word Habsburg, because it matters far more than the corpse. Then, in September 1506, Philip died suddenly at 28 after a 5-day fever. Some whispered poison. Joanna was pregnant with their 6th child, and she broke. She refused to bury him. His body was embalmed and sealed in lead. For months, she traveled across Spain with the coffin at her side, moving slowly toward Granada. Witnesses said she would travel only at night, so no other woman could look at him. She would open the coffin to check he was still there. He had cheated on her alive. She would not let him cheat on her dead. But was she truly mad? One man who actually traveled beside her, Pedro Martir, said the most she ever did was stare at the body for a long time. No sleeping next to a corpse, no kissing it for weeks. Those lurid details came later from people who needed her to look insane, because someone did need that. Her father, Ferdinand, wanted her throne. So he spread the word that his daughter could not rule, and he locked her inside a palace at Tordesillas, where she stayed alone for almost 50 years. The Mad Queen was in large part a story invented by a man stealing a crown. So here's the truth. Most people walk right past. Joanna's grief was not her real legacy. Her wedding was. Start with where she came from. Her own parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, were second cousins who shared a great-grandfather. Marrying that close was banned by the church. Scientists call a blood link like this consanguinity, which just means the two people are family. So her parents used a fake church document to slip past the rule. Joanna was already born from a knotted family tree. Then her marriage tied that tree to the Habsburgs. And the Habsburgs had one rule: keep the crown in the family. So they married inside it. Uncles wed nieces, cousins wed cousins, for almost 200 years. Scientists measure this with something called an inbreeding coefficient. It is just a number for how much of your DNA arrives doubled. Both copies handed down from the same ancestor. Picture a deck of cards. New people marrying and keep shuffling fresh cards into the deck. Marry your own family over and over, and you keep dealing from the same shrinking pile until the same broken cards come up again and again. The doubled cards came up. Joanna's husband Philip scored 0.25. Low. Safe. By the end of the line, her own descendant, Charles II, scored 0.254, the same level as a child born from a brother and a sister. Charles arrived with the famous Habsburg jaw, a lower jaw pushed out so far his teeth could not meet and he could barely chew. His tongue was too large for clear speech. He could not walk until he was nearly grown. The same closed bloodline had also been quietly killing Habsburg babies, cutting their chance of survival by almost a fifth. People did not understand DNA, so they reached for a simpler answer. They called him El Hechizado, the bewitched, as if a spell, and not a family tree, had done this to him. He could not father a child, and in 1700, the most powerful family in Europe died out with him, the slow final result of a wedding 2 centuries earlier, arranged by a girl history only remembers for a corpse she would not let go. The king who slept beside a corpse. Here is the part the history books skip past. 200 years after Joanna opened a coffin and refused to close it, her own descendant did almost the exact same thing. His name was Charles II. The bewitched one, the boy with the jaw that would not close. Near the end of his short life, sick and frightened and out of cures, the people around him pulled his dead father's body out of its tomb and laid it close to him. And Charles slept beside the corpse. Most people who tell the story say it was the final proof that the king had lost his mind. The same word the family had once thrown at Joanna, but it was not even his idea. His mother arranged it, and her doctors told her sleeping near the dug-up body might do him some good. Sit with that for a second. The family began with a queen who would not let go of a corpse. It ended with a king lying next to one. The same strange picture 200 years apart, on the two far ends of the same broken bloodline. Joanna was called mad for it. Charles was called bewitched for it. Neither of them was either. Both were simply trapped inside a story far bigger than themselves. A story that started on a wedding day and would not stop pulling people in. Charles was trapped worst of all. He had been weak from the day he was born. He could not speak until he was 4 and could not walk until he was 8. For most of his life, his own court was quietly waiting for him to die. Picture that. A king who could barely chew his food, who could barely cross a room, sitting on top of the largest empire the world had ever seen. Land in Europe, land in the Americas, land in Asia, all of it run on paper by a man whose body had been failing since his first breath. By his final year, that body was giving out completely. He had swelling all over, fevers that would not break, a stomach that could keep nothing down. The court physicians tried everything they knew, and everything they knew was useless. They placed freshly killed pigeons on his head and laid the warm insides of animals across his belly to draw out the sickness. They sprinkled him with strong drink. When medicine failed, they called the priests, and the priests tried to drive out the demon they were sure had cursed him. That is how the nickname stuck. El Hechizado, the bewitched. None of it worked. On the first day of November in the year 1700, Charles II died. He was just short of his 39th birthday. Then came the autopsy. And this is where 200 years of quiet damage finally became something a person could see with their own eyes. The physician who opened the body wrote down what he found. He said the corpse did not contain a single drop of blood. He said the heart was tiny, the lungs were eaten away, the insides were rotten, the head was full of water. Some of that was surely exaggeration, the kind of thing a frightened doctor writes about a cursed king. But the message underneath was true enough. This was a body that had been failing from the very start. A body dealt from a deck that had been shuffled and reshuffled within the same shrinking pile until almost nothing healthy was left to deal. Charles left no children. 2 wives, 2 marriages, not 1 heir. The most powerful family in Europe had finally run out of road. But here is what almost nobody tells you about that deathbed. In his last weeks, too weak to hold a pen for long, Charles signed one piece of paper, one final decision, a single name written into a will. He believed he was saving his empire. He had no idea he was lighting a fuse, because the name he wrote down was not a Habsburg. And that one signature was about to drag the whole of Europe into a war that would kill more people than the Jaw ever did. The paper that started a war. The name on the paper was Philip of Anjou. He was 16 years old. He was French, and he was the grandson of Louis XIV, the most powerful king alive at the time. Charles chose him for a simple reason. He wanted his empire to stay in one piece. He had watched his whole life fall apart, and he did not want his kingdom to fall apart too. He believed only France was strong enough to hold all of Spain's scattered lands together. So with the last of his strength, the dying Habsburg handed the keys of the Spanish Empire to a French boy, and every other king in Europe lost his mind. Here is why. Spain was enormous. It still owned land across Europe, all across the Americas, and out into Asia. France was already the strongest country on the continent. So if one single family suddenly controlled both France and Spain at the same time, that family would control nearly everything. The careful balance that kept any one ruler from swallowing the whole continent would vanish overnight. The other powers were terrified of France and Spain joining into one empire too large to stop. So they did the only thing kings of that age knew how to do. They went to war. It was called the War of the Spanish Succession, and it lasted 13 long years, from 1701 to 1714. On one side stood France and Spain. On the other stood England, the Dutch, Austria, and a long list of smaller states, all fighting to stop the Bourbons from owning too much of the world. The fighting spread far past Europe and reached all the way to North America. Battle after battle, siege after siege. Whole towns burned over the question of who would sit on the throne of a king who could not even father a child. Now think about the cost of that. Across both sides, more than 1 million men were killed, wounded, or died of disease over the course of the war. 1 million. That is not a number you can really picture. So shrink it down. Every one of those men had a mother, a name, a village, a life that ended in mud somewhere far from home. And the thread that ran back through all of it, if you followed it carefully enough, did not start with a general or a battle plan. It started with a wedding in 1496 and a family that spent 200 years refusing to let in new blood, until it produced a king too broken to leave an heir. That is the part people miss. The intro promised you the damage would surface in the body of a child king. It did, but it did not stop at his body. It spilled out of his empty tomb and across an entire continent. The war finally wore everyone down. Exhausted and broke, the powers signed a stack of peace deals known together as the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 and 1714. In the end, Philip kept the Spanish crown, but only on the strict promise that France and Spain would never become one country. Europe got its balance back. Spain got a French king, and the Habsburgs, the family that had ruled Spain for nearly 200 years, were finished there for good. You would think that would be the end of the curse. It was not, because Spain was only ever half of the family. There was a second branch, another whole line of Habsburgs, sitting on another throne, in another country, and that branch was carrying the very same broken cards, marching toward the very same ending. The other half of the family. To understand the second branch, you have to go all the way back to Joanna one more time. Joanna had 6 children. She and Philip had 6, and almost all of them grew up to rule or marry into the great houses of Europe. 2 of her sons matter most for this story. One was Charles, who grew up to rule Spain and became Charles V, the most powerful man on earth in his day. The other was his younger brother Ferdinand, who took control of the family's lands in Austria and Central Europe. So the family split clean in two brothers, 2 crowns, 1 throne in Madrid, 1 throne in Vienna, the Spanish Habsburgs and the Austrian Habsburgs. Both branches grew from the same root, the children of Joanna. And here is the trap they built for themselves with their own hands. When it came time to marry, the 2 branches did not go looking for strangers to freshen up the bloodline. They married each other. The Spanish cousins married the Austrian cousins, the Austrian uncles married the Spanish nieces. Back and forth over and over for 200 years, they kept the crown circling between 2 halves of one single family as if the rest of the world did not exist. This is the deck of cards again, and it is worse than it first looks. Remember, both halves came from Joanna. So when the Spanish side married the Austrian side, they were not adding fresh cards from a different deck. They were dealing from the very same pile, just from 2 different directions at once. The shuffle that everyone thought was happening was no shuffle at all. So of course the Austrian branch carried the very same mark, the same heavy chin, the same jaw that would not close. You can still walk into a museum today and see it for yourself, frozen on the wall in the family portraits. The famous Habsburg jaw stares back at you from the paintings of the great artist Velázquez. The long jaw, the thick lower lip, the same tired face passed down through 2 countries and a dozen generations, like a debt that could never be paid off. And the same ending came for the Austrians too. In 1740, the Austrian male line ran dry, in almost the exact same way the Spanish one had 40 years earlier. The last male Habsburg emperor, Charles VI, died with no son to take his place. And just like before, his death set off another war over who would inherit. They named this one the War of the Austrian Succession. Same family, same problem. Same blood spilled over an empty chair. It really looked like the whole dynasty was finally going to die out completely, the way Charles II had died, quietly, painfully, with the doubled cards coming up one last time, in 2 countries at once, until there was nothing left to deal. But this time, one person did something no Habsburg had done in 200 years, and it would finally break the spell. The woman who broke the spell. Her name was Maria Theresa. She was the daughter of Charles VI, the emperor who died with no son. When her father was gone, the rest of Europe simply assumed a woman could never hold an empire that size together. They were wrong about her completely. She fought a long war just to keep her own throne, and she won it, and then she ruled for 40 years and reformed nearly everything she touched. Maria Theresa held the Habsburg lands together and became one of the strongest rulers the family ever produced. But the single most important thing she ever did was not won on a battlefield. It was done at the altar. Maria Theresa married a man named Francis Stephen, and Francis Stephen was not a Habsburg. He came from a different house entirely, the House of Lorraine. In the language of the deck of cards, he was a whole stack of brand new cards, finally shuffled into a pile that had been dealing from itself for 200 years. Her marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine brought a fresh bloodline into the family and started a new branch called Habsburg-Lorraine. From that day, the family even had a new name, not Habsburg, Habsburg-Lorraine. New blood, at last, in a line that had been strangling itself for generations, and slowly the curse began to lift. The jaw softened in the children who came after. The baby stopped dying at the old terrible rate. The same family that had nearly wiped itself off the face of the earth suddenly had a future again, all because one woman, in one wedding, finally said yes to a stranger instead of a cousin. Centuries later, science went back and proved what the family never understood about itself. In 2019, a team of researchers studied dozens of Habsburg portraits and lined them up against the family tree. They found a clear link between how inbred a Habsburg was and how severe that famous jaw turned out to be. The deck of cards was no longer a guess. It was written right there in their faces, generation by generation. The lead scientist even said the family had become something rare and useful to study, a kind of human laboratory for understanding what happens when a bloodline closes itself off from the world. Now follow the whole thread back to where it started. Both branches, the Spanish one and the Austrian one, both of them grew out of Joanna. Both of them came from her wedding in 1496. So when the cousins married the cousins and the uncles married the nieces for 200 years, they were really just marrying Joanna's children back into Joanna's children, again and again, until the deck had nothing fresh left in it. The corpse she dragged across Spain is what made her famous. But the wedding is what made the bodies. Charles II's heart, no bigger than a peppercorn. The Habsburg babies who never saw their first birthday. The million men killed in the wars over her family's empty thrones. All of it traces back to a 16-year-old bride, a handsome duke, and a family that decided to keep its blood to itself. So here at the very end is the thing most people get wrong. They remember Joanna for the corpse. They picked the wrong body. The body that truly mattered was never Philip's, lying sealed in lead while she traveled by night. The body that mattered came 200 years later, a small, broken king who could not chew his food, the last of a line that began on her wedding day and ended on his deathbed. Joanna herself died in 1555, after nearly 50 years locked away, still calling herself queen, her son keeping her confined to the very end. The world had already decided she was the mad one, but she was not the curse. She was just the first card dealt from a deck that nobody else noticed was poisoned. The real curse was never her grief, it was never the corpse, or the madness, or the spell the priests tried to chase out of a dying king. The real curse was a wedding ring, and it only broke after 200 years and a million graves on the day one woman finally married a stranger.